Good evening. Do you all have the handout? Does it work? Okay, good. Does anyone have problems with your cell phones? Anyone who has Verizon, I think, could not use the cell phones for many hours now. So it's not you this time. Yes, it's... I don't know, I just wanted you to know that it's not you, because I wasted about 15, 20 minutes playing with my phone, what happened, restarted it, but it's not you. Okay, today we're going to continue in the 1960s and 70s and maybe even a little bit beyond with some of the most fascinating stories in the history of Israel. I will mention the big events, but the focus, as it was last time, will not be on the big events because you probably know them or it's very easy to get information about them, but about the small stories. And the first one I want to begin with is the nuclear reactor that Israel was able to get. Now, officially, Israel does not have it. Israel never admitted to have it, but every child knows that Israel has it, and every preschooler in Israel knows exactly where it is and what's the capabilities of this nuclear plant. It's quite fascinating. Israel was founded in 1948, and we talked about it last time, all these wars, lack of money, lack of people, lack of everything. And 10 years later, Israel decided that it needs a nuclear bomb. I think it's easy to explain why, especially after the Holocaust. We were completely powerless when the Nazis did whatever they wanted to our people. And in many ways, Israel started to see itself as the defender of the Jews around the world, especially the defender of the Jews in Israel. Hello, Pamela. Just take okay. It's really interesting to see how different countries went from being very close and supportive of Israel to being much less. Things kept changing constantly, and this is still the reality today. The major supplier of weapons to Israel in the first decade was France. Okay, we'll talk about two things that Israel used to get from France and then couldn't get from France. The French decided to help Israel to build a nuclear reactor secretly. Why secretly? Because they didn't want mainly the United States to know or the USSR at the time. But nonetheless, they decided to help. And that was 1958. It took the Americans less than 2 years to figure out, do you know the U2? U2 is not only a rock band from Ireland, it is actually named after these huge spy aircrafts. They flew over the Negev, the town is Dimona, and saw this huge dome and things that were extremely suspicious. When President Kennedy called Ben-Gurion, the legendary leader of Israel, and said, "What's happening there? Are you building a nuclear reactor?" Ben-Gurion said, "No, it's just a textile factory." Well, JFK was pissed. He didn't buy the story of the textile thing, and then Israel said, "No, it's actually not real textile. It's a nuclear plant, but only for research purposes." We heard it from Iran and other countries. But JFK was obsessed with anti-proliferation of nuclear weapon. He didn't want other countries who had not had it by that time to have it, especially not this little thing in the Middle East with less than 3 million people, with so many enemies surrounding them. it was not good for the world in his view. And I can understand. So Kennedy demanded, and I read the letters, they are available online, to Ben-Gurion. He was really angry. I use that word deliberately. He was really, really angry how Israel can do something like that without getting permission, or at least informing the US. And he insisted to check the place. Israel agreed because Ben-Gurion had absolutely no choice. When the American president wants something, the American presidents get it, and then the Israeli prime minister has to explain it to his people, no matter what were their statements before. I was extremely busy today, didn't read the papers the way I normally read, but Plan B in the Gaza agreement just started today. Even though Netanyahu and everyone said it will not happen, but Trump said it's happening, and it's happening. So this is not new. Okay, so we can say whatever we want, but the American president normally has a lot of power. But the compromise was that the US would send scientists to because it was, Israel said it was a scientific place, and send scientists, and they will convince you, Mr. President, that that's all we have there. So the US sent the scientist, but under few conditions. Israel had to tell them when they can come. And of course, the Israelis who work there guided them. So what the Israelis did before the visit of the American scientist was to build false walls that concealed the places that should have been concealed. Most of the serious activities that were related to the building of the bomb were underground, and they had to conceal the elevators that went underground. They even built a fake control room. And there are some stories that the scientists, actually many of the scientists died from cancer because back then they didn't know how dangerous it was to work with nuclear materials. But some of them said that just before that, they had to place a cup of coffee here and another cup here, and to put a poster of that on that wall just to create the impression that everything there was kosher. And they succeeded with the scientists. The scientists went back to America. At that point, JFK was not around anymore for reasons that you know. And they said, okay, just don't dare to do it. The CIA did not buy the story. The CIA did not believe the scientists because scientists are not spies. They don't have background in that. And the CIA was convinced that the Israelis were able to deceive the scientists and put more pressure. But eventually, especially when Lyndon Johnson, when the CIA said, Israel definitely has it. You know what was his reaction? Just don't tell anyone. He didn't want to start the whole thing. There was no point at that time to do it. It was too late. And he didn't do much, only to make Israel agree to two conditions that Israel still keeps. One is the ambiguity. That's the official term. Israel will never confirm nor deny that it has a nuclear weapon. Okay? Second condition or second promise was that Israel will never be the first country to use nuclear weapon against any of its enemies. So far, so good. Okay? So I just gave you the big agreement. The last one was between Nixon and Golda Meir. She agreed, and it was the don't ask, don't tell. But in between, there were other issues. I said that Israel started the nuclear reactor, the building of the plant, with French help. They supply Israel with the plants, with the building materials, and with the uranium, or the yellow cake, the material that you need to create bombs. But then something happened in 1967 that changed the way the French felt about Israel. What happened in 1967? The Six-Day War, or the 67 War, and many countries had to choose sides now. Are you on the Arab side or are you on the Israeli side? And the French, especially de Gaulle, was very adamant about not being on the Israeli side. Okay, so in 67, there was a weapon embargo, a French weapon embargo against selling weapon to Israel, and weapon includes uranium and other precious materials needed for nuclear bombs. So Israel had the reactor, but a reactor needs constant supply of uranium, or yellow cake as it's normally known. How do you get it? How do you get it? Nobody would sell Israel that because the US would not allow. The USSR, since '67, became an enemy of Israel, the most fearful enemy that Israel ever had. We always had this fear that one day the Soviets will decide to help the Arab nations surrounding Israel, not only by selling weapons, but by intervening and attacking Israel directly. How do you do it? You steal it. Yes, Israel was very good at stealing things, and this is only the first story about it. Now, it's not that it's part of the nature of Israel. I truly believe that at least Ben-Gurion and the leaders of that time, definitely Shimon Peres, who was legendary in getting all these materials from the French, and then others, they believe that it's about the survival of the Jews. And it didn't take a huge imagination a short time after the Holocaust to believe that the Jews may be attacked again. And we already lost 1/3 of our nation, and it may happen again. So for them, I think, of course, there is politics and pride and everything else, but Israel was under existential threat. And they would do anything that they needed in order to make sure that something like the Holocaust will never happen again. The other thing is that they had some people, especially because of the Holocaust around the world, especially in Europe, who felt guilty, or at least sympathized with Israel, or with the Jewish people when the atrocities of the Holocaust were known, and were willing to help. So what happened was that the Mossad, the Israeli clandestine service, formed a straw company somewhere, I don't remember where, in Liberia. And this company bought a lot of this yellow cake to send to another company that does research in Italy. So they got the material, and the ship disappeared in the Mediterranean. And we know the facts now. In the middle of the night, an Israeli ship came and delivered all the containers with the yellow cake from that ship to the Israeli ship, and then the original one ended up empty in Turkey. They figured out later on that even the Italian research company was fake. There was a company, but it was a tiny little thing that definitely did not need so many tons of uranium. And that's what we have. And since then, Israel found different ways to develop it and to get it. But still, officially, Israel never admitted of having it. There is a big debate in Israel if it's a good thing or a bad thing, because the original idea was that Israel would not be attacked by anyone knowing that Israel has a nuclear weapon. How did that work out? Israel was attacked time and again because it's just too big, it's too fatal. I mean, for Israel, for example, if it's attacked by Lebanon, what can Israel really do with nuclear weapon from, or even against Syria? First of all, it's so close geographically that Israel can suffer too. But it's just too big, too much. But others argue that it prevented worse things. I personally believe that it's better to have it than not to have it, and definitely better for Israel to have it than any other Arab country around. Because if the Iraqis had nuclear weapon, which they almost said before Israel bombed their nuclear reactor, if Iran, or when Iran will have, I don't even know what's happening there, nobody really knows what's happening there, that can really be very, very dangerous to the existence of Israel. So the first item on that, on our handout today, called it the insurance or the textile factory. Any comments, any questions? Yes.
Was
The Italian company, was it run by Jews? No, they just used something almost fictional. It was the way they used the straw company to buy it. The Italian company existed, but it was really a fake little thing. I don't know if it was owned by Jews or not. It's a good question for the other things that we will cover later. Do you have a, yes, sir?
One little fun fact and then a question. Perez was in Paris to sign the nuclear agreement, and his counterpart, the French counterpart, was not kept him waiting all day and into the night because the government fell. So the next day, the guy showed up to the meeting and said, "Sorry, I can't do it, I'm out of power." So Shimon Peres said, "Well, can we just backdate it to yesterday?"
Yeah. That's a fact. So let me just repeat, because it's such an amazing story that became public only several years ago. So when Shimon Peres, have you heard of Shimon Peres? He's the guy, he's the ultimate underdog of Israeli politics. I think after Ben Gurion, he was the most important person in the history of Israel. He made things happen. No matter how, Ben Gurion normally had a vision, and Peres know how to make it happen. Okay, so it's Peres who got the nuclear reactor from France. Just like Ben Gurion, the guy never had any academic degrees or anything like that, but he was super brilliant. He spoke all the languages that one can speak, none of them with a reasonable accent, but people understood him. He was just a genius and knew how to do things. And just like Ben Gurion, he died more or less penniless, unlike the current leaders of Israel who are all millionaires. It's a completely different generation of people who believed, who gave everything they had and more to Israel and to the Jewish people without an iota of cynicism. Today, I think it's mostly cynicism with an iota of sincerity, but we'll see that's for a different class. Okay, so this is Shimon Peres. So he went to France to sign all the contracts, and as Jeff told us the story, he just didn't have the mic, so I have to repeat it. The person, the representative of the government who was supposed to sign the agreement basically lost his position overnight because the French government collapsed. So he showed up the next day and said, I don't hold this position, don't have the authority. And Peres, in the most Israeli way you can imagine, said, just backdate it to yesterday and sign it. They did, and the French, even after the embargo, they kept their promise and they continued to live by the agreement. Quite.
One more wrinkle to that. French were part of the non-proliferation treaty, so they were unable to sell it to Israel. So Perez said, well, you can lease it to us, can't you? And so it was actually a lease.
It was a lease, yes, and the French leased it to Israel. They didn't sell it. They got in trouble for what they did or didn't do. I saw another hand, yes. Why after the 67 war France opposed Israel? Because it was basically, if you're with Israel, you're against the Arab world. Oil was really important back then. I don't know if it's still as important as some people want you to think, but definitely in the 60s and 70s, it was super important. And Israel doesn't have oil. The Arab world has a lot. Okay, so many countries found themselves siding with the Arabs against the Israelis. A lot of companies, growing up in Israel in the 70s and in the 80s, we didn't have McDonald's, we didn't have Japanese cars. The only Japanese car that existed in Israel was Subaru. That's why Israelis still remember it and think of it. No Toyota, no Honda. We saw it in movies or when we left Israel. Tons of companies did not. We didn't have Pepsi. We didn't understand the movie. Why? What's this Pepsi? Only Coca-Cola did sell in Israel, but so many companies that we were aware of by watching movies, and that's what we did because TV and movies refused to sell to Israel. Okay, so that was not, we took it for granted. As kids, yeah, they don't like us because, or they do like us. It's better to support these hundreds of millions of Arabs around with wealth and oil over Israel that at the time was what, 4 million maybe? Okay. Let's move to the next military-related thing, because this is another amazing story. So the Israeli Air Force was made of mainly French aircrafts, combat French aircrafts, the Mirage 3. They were good. They were very good. But Israel needed few new ones. So it ordered and paid for 50 new aircrafts, the Mirage 5 now. Now, not only that they paid and ordered them, Israeli pilots and engineers went to France to help to develop it. Because how many pilots really in the world had so much combat experience? And who were the enemies of Israel? Where did the enemies of Israel got their airplanes? Russia. Okay? So we knew the Russian airplanes very well, the MiGs, the MiG-21, MiG-23 at the time. So the Israelis knew it, not just by reading books and going on AI to check it out, but really fighting the Russian weapon and knew a lot. But 67 and the French changed their mind. Ultimately, they returned the money, but refused to sell the airplanes. And Israel desperately needed airplanes. And they needed good ones in order to fight the Russian MiGs. What did they do? Here your question about, was it Jewish or not? They couldn't get it from France, but France had a factory that manufactured the Mirage in Switzerland. So the Mossad found a sympathetic Swiss guy, not a Jew, but he sympathized with Israel and felt guilty by the Holocaust and $200,000 at the time helped a little bit too. But, I used to think that people do it for a reason. I can easily see this combination. Yes, he really sympathized with Israel. He really wanted to help Israel, but $200,000 helped. And I don't know what it meant in the 1960s, much more than 200,000 today. Okay? So this man, again, he was Swiss, worked for a Swiss company that manufactured the French airplanes in Switzerland, the Mirage 5. One of his roles was incinerating, burning all the old papers of airplanes, because you need to get rid of them, and there was a way to do it. So he said that he was going to get rid of the plans, of the blueprints of the Mirage 3 and other things. What he did was to rent a truck, a huge truck, put the actual plans in the truck. He also rented a warehouse nearby, took what he was supposed to burn to the warehouse and burnt regular papers. Because you need to see fire, right? You cannot just incinerate stuff and you need smoke to prove. And he collected a whole treasure. The Israelis came, picked it up, went back with the full plans of the Mirage 5 and built it. They called this airplane Nesher, Hawk. Okay, that was the Nesher. But the Nesher, which was exactly like the Mirage 5, was not good enough. Because now especially the main enemy of Israel at the time was Egypt. Egypt had a very strong army with a strong air force and great relationship with the USSR. So the Kfir, the Nesher, the original one that very few people know about, was good but not good enough. So Israelis decided we need to do better, and they did something that has never been done before. They took the beautiful French aircraft, took out its original engine, and put inside an American aircraft engine, the engine of the Phantom, if you're into military or combat aircrafts, which was extremely more powerful than the Kfir. So the Kfir was very slick, but didn't have the power that Israeli wanted. There were serious problems with the engine, with the American engine. It was too short, it was too heavy, it was too wide. Well, they found a way to do it. Okay, they found a way to create these Frankenstein airplanes that mostly based on the fuselage of the Mirage with the American engine. They had to make different things because the first time it was not balanced because it's a new engine, and then they had to recreate the back fuselage and added new things. Eventually, the Kfir was an exceptionally fantastic aircraft. It was so good, it easily defeated the MiG-21 and even the MiG-23, the Russian aircraft that the Arabs had. And Israel wanted to sell it because Israel needed to sell stuff. They didn't have too much to sell. And selling this airplane that did so well in real combat, a lot, many countries wanted to buy it. Who didn't want Israel to sell? The US. And why? Because the US wanted to sell the F-16. Why did they have a word in that? Because the engine was American. And when America sells you aircraft's engines, America has a veto right to what you can do with your aircraft. So whenever Israel almost signed a lucrative sales agreement with any countries, the Americans said no. ultimately, they allowed Israel to sell it to Ecuador and El Salvador that use it, but nothing to any major country who was willing to pay well and to buy a lot. So it was a very good, very successful aircraft that failed miserably commercially because the US did not allow Israel to sell it. But this ingenuity of first stealing the plans, literally, I don't like this word, so I don't use it often, but literally stole the plans from the French government, okay? And then build exactly the French plane, only to outfit it with American engine, to turn it into something much better, at least for the Israeli needs, and then to equip it with Israeli technology. It's something that, at least at the time, and I'm not a huge expert, was not done. Growing up, by the way, in Israel at the time, for us, I don't know, I heard, I never, of course, never did it, but I heard that some boys in their teens like to read magazines like Playboy. For us, it was all about weapon. If you found something with weapon, any kind of information about, oh, wow, look at that aircraft, look at that. We would analyze it, we would talk about it for hours. That was our stuff. And when we saw an airplane, you rarely see them, right? We try to analyze it by the white smoke there, and that was our obsession, the aircrafts. Because it was really the Israeli Air Force that was the dominant force behind the IDF. They did most of the amazing work. So that's how we got the Kfir. Kfir literally means a cub lion, a baby lion, and that's the Kfir. Something I'm not going to talk too much about, but then Israel decided, wow, we're quite good. Let's build an aircraft now from scratch. We know how to do it. And initially, even America supported it and gave, I think, something like $1.5 billion, which back then was tons of money. But because of politics and corruption and other things, the whole project went down. And on paper, it was supposed to be the best combat aircraft ever in the world. Nothing came out of it. Okay, that was one of the major disappointments and failures of the weapon industry of Israel.
I'm going to ask you, Rabbi, where were the Israeli pilots being trained at that particular point in time where you got a U.S. engine ending up?
So normally the way it works, I cannot tell you exactly about the 60s, but if Israel buys now the F-35, it sends pilots to the U.S. about 2 years before the deal. Yes, for years they go to the U.S., they train, they learn. It's not like, you get a car, you watch a little video, and you start driving it. So yeah, so the pilots live for a very long. Now the airplanes come from the U.S. But yeah, and it's not just the pilots. There is a whole crew that moves to different Air Force bases, and that's what they do. They train, they learn. What also happens, since you're asking, sometimes Israel buys the airplanes almost naked, without the technology, and then they outfit it with Israeli technology to save money, and it's all, and at least it's better for the Israeli purposes, because the U.S. Does not fight the same fight, so even theoretically that Israel is fighting. Okay, different range, different.
Rabbi, you had said that France wouldn't sell to Israel, but doesn't France have one of the larger populations of Jews in the world?
Yes, but it's still insignificant. And think about the Muslim population in France versus the Jewish population. Yeah, no, but especially there, because all the Algerian who came and people from other French colonies who became French citizens, the Jewish political power of The political power of Jews in France is minimal, even back then. And the Jewish community there is definitely not growing, because it's very hard to be a Jew in Europe, and especially in France. I skipped something, but I think for a good reason. I went to number 3 just because we were into military and combat and stealing or borrowing things from the French and making good stuff with them. Let's go to number 2, the Eichmann trial. Eichmann was an SS officer who was one of the architects of, if you want, the final solution. He was it. He was one of these, just a bureaucrat, but he knew how to do it. He knew how to transfer the Jews to wherever they should have transferred. You know all about that. Many people, many SS officers, after 1945, fled Germany. They didn't want to be put to trial, and many of them went to Argentina. That was quite a safe haven for them. Here is the great story. It's really good. I mean, all these stories are great. That's why I choose them. But this is a great story. So Eichmann moved to Argentina, lived very austere, simple life on Garibaldi Street, and the reason I remember it is that one of the books that I had to read was The Man on Garibaldi Street. So it's in Buenos Aires. He lived there, very simple life, worked for a Mercedes-Benz factory in Argentina, changed his name to Ricardo something. Okay? So far, so good. There was another person, a Jew, who survived the Holocaust in Germany, a German Jew, survived the Holocaust, lost his eyesight, so he was blind, moved to Buenos Aires, and had a beautiful daughter. This beautiful daughter of his fell in love with a young man. No, Ricardo was not young and not lovely looking at all. No, with Ricardo's son. And Ricardo's son, like many young people, was arrogant and refused to go by the Spanish or the Argentinian name and called himself, I forgot the first name, Eichmann. Not only that, he was bragging that his father was a high officer in Germany and was constantly complaining that the world did not let the German finish the job. And this is the daughter of a Holocaust survivor. She came back to her father, told him the story and the name, and he recognized the name. What do you do with that? You're just a regular man in Buenos Aires, blind man, right? In the late 50s or early 60s, what do you do? Sorry? Give it calling the Germans. Because the Germans were supposed to prosecute all the Nazis, right? So he wrote a letter with the information that he gathered. He actually sent his daughter again to the house, and an older, balding man opened the door and introduced himself as the uncle of the young man. But then when the young man came and called, "Hey, Dad," okay? Well, the Germans very likely would have buried it, because the Germans, after the war, many of them tried to protect their former comrades. Don't think that, oh, you were, and in many ways, many of them were guilty or, okay? So they were not so eager to investigate. Only that this letter landed on the desk of the Attorney General. You know, Germany is a confederation, it's a federation, and one of the states is Hesse. So that's where the letter landed, on the desk of the Attorney General of Hesse. Opened the letter. Now you have to know something about this guy. He was a Jew. He was a Jew who somehow survived, and you know, we're talking now about 1961, so that was his job. He knew that if he will go to the police or to the intelligence services of Germany, they would immediately tip Eichmann off. That's what they did often. They protected their own. And what he did was considered to be treason. He called the Israelis. He called the Israelis. And the Israelis checked and realized that the information they got was gold. The Mossad had a very successful operation. It was close to the Independence Day of Argentina at the time. Argentina was a young country. They sent a delegation, so they had a special El Al flight to Argentina. Before that, they followed Eichmann. All the SS officers had a tattoo of their blood type on their arms. But it's hard to find out before you catch it. In any case, they follow Eichmann, and like a good German bureaucrat, he stuck to his routine. Every single day, he would go to work at a Mercedes-Benz factory and come home exactly on the bus of 7:40. So they had a team of the biggest stars of the Mossad, and those of you who read Daniel Silva, anyone here reads the Daniel Silva books? Oh, you read everything, so I can just make up a name and you probably read it. No, he writes, he has a whole series now about almost 30 books about an Israeli Mossad agent but in that book he's an art restorer. It's modeled after few people, but one of them, who was the main guy at the operation of catching Eichmann, was a painter. Okay, so yeah, it's a lot of these fiction books have some are based on some real material. In any case, the bus, when they were ready, the group of the Mossad agents was ready. 7:40. The bus arrives, no Eichmann. They were about to call it off, but then they decided, let's just wait. The next bus of 8 p.m. arrived, and Eichmann was there. Threw him to a ditch, put him in the back of a car, looked for the tattoo. Instead of the tattoo of a blood type, they saw, he removed it with a cigarette. I assume they were not very gentle with him. He admitted that he was really Eichmann after many days in a safe house in Buenos Aires. Now, how would you take him back to Israel? So that's where the story of the El Al special flight of some Israeli dignitaries who came to Argentina in honor of their Independence Day. So they came, the Argentinians were not suspicious at all. It made a lot of sense. The Mossad people drugged Eichmann enough for him to be able to walk, but not to talk. I don't know how to do it. It's an art, but they're good at this stuff. And they walked through the airport and they dressed him like an El Al flight attendant. And they were saying, oh, this guy was partying last night. He cannot even walk by himself. And it's a very credible story. Remember, it's before September 11th. It was also hard to fly, and the security was not, actually did not exist. They put him on the Israeli airplane and took him to Israel. The trial. They converted a theater in Jerusalem, Beit Ha'am it was called, into a courtroom. and they built Percy glass box for Eichmann, allegedly to protect him. I always believed it was much more. There was this act of humiliation and putting him in a cage, because he was really in a cage. They could have protected him differently. But it's not that I feel bad about it, don't take me wrong. But seeing the SS officer in a cage in Jerusalem, having to answer to an Israeli court. And a lot of famous things came out of that trial. The Israeli Attorney General at the time, Hauser, had the famous line. He said, "I'm not standing here alone. I have 6 million dead people with me." Okay, so this is one of the big lines from the trial. They had over 100 witnesses. They broadcasted it on the radio. And this was the first time that Israelis started to talk about the Holocaust. Because before that, the message was, move on. Don't talk about it, belonged in the past, we cannot dwell on the past, we have to move on, we have a country to build. And many of the Israelis were quite shameful about the Holocaust because we didn't fight back, okay? The expression that was used is walking like sheep to the slaughter. We didn't do anything. They told us to go, we went, and they killed us, okay? So there was the feelings that we have today towards the Holocaust were not the feelings that Israelis had, and they didn't have, many of them didn't have the information. And even after that, many didn't want. Two of my grandparents were Holocaust survivors. One of them, my grandmother, just wanted to talk about it. Nobody wanted to listen, I have to admit. And my grandfather never wanted to say a word about it, okay? But during the Eichmann trial, that the entire state of Israel was glued to the radio, they heard the testimonies. And it gave the Holocaust survivors the encouragement, even the permission to talk about what happened. It's not only that it's okay to talk, we must talk. Okay, so that was a huge shift from just shut up and move on to no, the world needs to know. And that's what the time that the world started to learn about it. This is the time that American Jews started to talk about it. Because after the war, they didn't. But it was the Eichmann trial. And those of you who are into philosophy or political science, have you heard about Hannah Arendt? She's one of the most important philosophers of our time. She's a Jew. She was a German Jew who moved to the US. She was sent by the New Yorker to write about the trial. And her book, Eichmann in Jerusalem, it's a small book, which is basically a collection of her articles from the New Yorker. I believe is one of the most important books of the 20th century. And she coined the term there, the banality of evil. Because when we think of the Nazis, we really think about the most evil people. And when you look at Eichmann, what was his line all the time? I just followed orders. And she said, it's the banality of, you don't need to be a monster, a sociopath to do it. Because almost all of them were just bureaucrats who were great fathers and good people, super educated. The number of SS officers with PhD was tremendous. But when I do my job, they tell me to do that. That's what I do. Okay, so she coined this expression, the banality of evil, which it's important to look at and at least to get a sense what she meant by it. Not an easy book to read, even though it's very short. But that changed the entire concept or the perception of the Holocaust in Israel and in the world.
What's the name of the book again?
Eichmann in Jerusalem.
Thank you.
I remember as a young teenager watching TV production of a play called The Man in the Glass Booth.
The Man in the Glass Booth. Yeah, that was the play based on the Eichmann trial.
I was truly touched by it. I really hadn't learned much about the Holocaust at that time, but
Yeah, many people did not, and that was the Eichmann. The trial of Eichmann was it. It brought the Holocaust to the surface, to the reality of people around the world, Jews and not Jews alike. He was found guilty, obviously, and was executed. The only time in the history of the State of Israel that somebody was executed was Eichmann, Adolf Eichmann. The main judge, the head of the trial, before he died, said, "I wish we didn't do it." But at the time, just think about it, putting this guy in jail or keeping him in his glass box like a monkey in a zoo would be more beneficial than just killing him. But I guess the people needed it. They needed the full revenge, and anything short of execution. Yeah, Israel never it's permitted by law, but again, Israel never did it. No matter all the biggest terrorists who were caught, Israel never condemned them to death. Okay, but Eichmann did. So they hung him, and then they were afraid that his grave will become a pilgrimage place for neo-Nazis. Would you believe that there are neo-Nazis after that? So they just spread it in the ocean. I think the way they did with bin Laden. They didn't want any, so not the Israelis this time, the Americans. So that was a major event in the history of Israel and the history of the Jews. Yes, sir.
do you know who would have been the defense counsel for Eichmann in the trial? Was it an Israeli attorney, or American attorney, or attorney throughout Europe?
There was definitely an Israeli one because it was an Israeli court. I think there was another, not American, I think there was another European. The interesting thing was that Germany didn't want Eichmann because they could have easily asked to have him because he was a German citizen, right? But they just didn't do it. And they were very concerned. The Germans was really, really concerned about this trial because it's not only the stories about the Holocaust, it's naming people who were still holding key positions in the German government and German administration. That was their main fear, right? Don't think simply, 1945, all the bad guys were out and now everyone is good, and no. And people protect their own. That's something we do. Okay, so that was their main fear, and they were afraid that they decided it's safer to leave it as an Israeli thing. Okay, let's go to number 4, the Yom Kippur War. I don't really feel like talking about it. I talked about it during the 50th anniversary of the Yom Kippur War. During Yom Kippur, it was, 3 years ago. And it was my worst sermon ever because at the end I said that the reason that Israel almost lost the war and suffered so much was the hubris of the Israelis. They said that the Arabs, especially Egypt, will never dare to attack Israel. So they had all the intelligence, they had everything they needed, but said, no, they won't do it, okay? Only that they did. And I ended the sermon by saying, it seems like things like that happening now, and if Israel will not change its conception, the conception, that's the word in Hebrew, something like that may happen soon. And it happened very soon with October 7, which is exactly the same hubris of the Israeli politicians and even the Israeli army. They won't do it, we're strong. We have this new toy, this fence that costs us $8 billion, and that will protect us forever. Don't worry, we don't have to. Yes, we all know the story of October 7. Okay, so that's all. I don't want to talk about that. It's you can learn about, but I included it because it's one of the most important events in the history of Israel, not only in the 1970s, but at all. 1977, probably the proudest moment I ever had being an Israeli. So Israel is in the Middle East, as you know. But nobody, at least until the Abraham Accord in the Middle East, or almost nobody, wanted to play with Israel. So when it came to an athletic and sports event, Israel was part of Europe, okay? So we were always part of Europe. And the main sports in Israel, or the main two sports, I don't know which one is more important, is soccer or football, as it's called in Israel, and basketball. The best basketball team in Israel until I don't know when was Maccabi Tel Aviv. I see you're smiling. So Maccabi Tel Aviv was an okay team. But in 1977, it won the European World Cup, which was tremendous. Now, it was not so much the game, the final game, which I will mention in a moment. It was the semi-final game, because the team against which Israel played was CSKA Moskva, which was Moscow, the Russian team, which was basically a team of the Red Army. They were all very big and very strong and very scary. Now, I mentioned it in a different context. Russia was Israel's enemy. So the Russians refused to come to Israel to play and refused to give visas to the Israeli players to go to Moscow. I don't know why Israel didn't get the technical win or whatever it is, but they agreed to play in a neutral place. So they met in these tiny things in a high school basketball court. No people, no audience for a team. And Israel defeated the Red Army, the CSKA Moskva. That was really the happiest moment that I can remember, because we didn't believe that it was even possible. And we defeated them. And then a short time later, Israel defeated the Italian team, Mobil Giorgi Varese, 78-77, and won. Now, ask yourself, how come? I mean, Israelis are really smart, but most of us are not 6'8", and we're not the best athletes in the world, and we're tiny. Back then, we were 4 or 5 million. How did we defeat the Russians? And back then, and Yugoslavia back then was great, and Italy and Spain. I mean, there were basketball empires. How did we do it? I don't think it was God. I think Israelis did, again, what Israelis were good at, especially when they always felt threatened. They realized that they can get American players. Israel was the first European team who recognized that even the worst American basketball players are better than the best European basketball players. So there was this scout in Harlem who saw this guy, Olsey Perry, 6'10" guy, brought him in. And they had Tal Brody. Tal Brody was a Jewish guy who came to play in the Maccabi game and was extremely good, brought another guy, Jim Boatwright, you don't know that name, and bye, Rebecca. Hi. And, and, and they changed the game completely. The Europeans didn't know what to do with this NBA-style game that was completely different than the European style. Because the Russians believe in this rigid training, and I'm not the one to describe basketball to you. But that's the main reason that Israel won. Later on, Olsi Perry even converted and lived in Israel. And after that, Tal Brody said the line that probably every Israeli kid knows, we are on the map. Okay, that was his line. Because Israel in these times was mostly a pariah among many countries. They didn't want anything to do with Israel. It was isolated. The UN recently legislated that Zionism is equal to racism, etc. And he said we're on the map. He didn't just say we won the game. He said, we are counted. We made it. That was 77. The semi-final play was in Belgium. Was in Belgium, yes. In a small town in Belgium, yes. Few Israelis were able to get there, and you can YouTube it. If you have any interest in basketball, you can YouTube it. Later on, now, another thing that is not popular here, and people don't know much about it, is the Eurovision. Eurovision is the most important, by far, music competition in the world. But not here in the US. The US doesn't care about it. Probably the only people you know is ABBA, right? Because they were the Swedish band that won the Eurovision at the time and became very famous. 1978, Israel won. Okay, there are many good Jewish musicians, but how do you win the Eurovision? Again, Israel did something that Israelis do, unique. Doesn't break the rules, but bend the unwritten rules at least, right? Like Maccabi Tel Aviv got the American players and was able to, it was not against the rules. Actually, somewhat, because they made them immediately Israeli citizens, and the whole stories of these huge Americans who had to circumcise, we love these stories. Seriously, I'm not kidding. Look it up. Now I cannot make up stuff, right? Because you go home, or even you take your phone out and you check it. So check it. No, it was, because I think there was a quota that you can have two foreign, they call them foreign players. But if you make the foreign player not foreign, maybe meaning an Israeli citizen, this person is not count, and you can bring more foreign players, okay? So what's the easiest way to make somebody an Israeli citizen? You make them a Jew, right? Because according to the law of return, every Jewish person automatically can become an Israeli citizen. So that was the whole thing. And the rabbinate, when it came to sports, didn't care so much. They made him a good Jew. Okay, Eurovision. In any case, the style of the Eurovision, you have a band or a group from almost every country in Europe, even the small ones, and the style was to sing in their own language, in their own style. Israel really wanted to win. So in 78, what was the musical style? Disco. Remember that, right? Now, Hebrew is not a very well-known language that makes people feel comfortable. You you don't want to dance disco at all. I don't know why people ever did it, but that's a different thing. In any case, so instead of like every country, or as Israel has been doing forever, sending an typical Israeli song that sounds like all Israel, they had a song that sounds like the Bee Gees, like super disco, but more than that. Instead of just singing it in Hebrew, the song is known as a Bani Bia Boebe. Anyone who ever speaks Hebrew will not recognize anything because it's a children's language. Okay, it's not a real language. So yeah, the song itself, it's called the Bet language. It's something that kids play with, okay? And so that was the song. So the words were not really hard. It sounded like rhythmic enough, and the disco was great, and people loved it. And it's the Middle East. That was 1978. What happened in 1977? Anwar Sadat, the president of Egypt, came to Israel, and that was in the midst of the peace negotiation between Israel and Egypt. All of a sudden, in time of peace, everyone loves Israel. Okay, so all the countries, because we used to see the Eurovision. I didn't care about the music. I never really cared about it. But at the end, every country gives a rank to all the songs. I think the best is 12. So they would say it in all languages, the 12 points. And so there were countries that automatically gave Israel 0 for political reasons. They just hated Israel, okay? So it has nothing to do with the quality of the music. But during the peacetime, 12 points to Israel. They wanted to show support to Israel. And the attitude in the world during, again, between 77 and 79, when the peace agreement between Israel and Egypt was finally signed, the shift, there was a major shift towards liking Israel now and supporting Israel, because people believed that this peace will change the Middle East. It did change the relationship between Israel and Egypt. No matter what happened in the past 50-something years, this border between Israel and Egypt is solid. It's safe. Okay. Even during the Arab Springs, if you remember when Hosni Mubarak was deposed, and there were some talks, they kept the peace to the letter. So no matter what, and there is tension, there is no love between Israel and Egypt, but the border is safe. So that was the Eurovision, and Israel won the Eurovision again the next year. And the funny thing here, it was that the Arab world also showed the Eurovision. It's really a major event. And typically, when the Israeli group sings, they don't show it. That was the case. Especially Jordan. Jordan borders Israel. So during the Eurovision, when the Israelis sang, they just didn't broadcast it. When it was clear that Israel was going to win, they stopped the broadcast and put a vase of daffodils. They didn't have anything else to do. So the Jordanians stared at these daffodils. The next days, the Jordanian papers reported that Belgium won the Eurovision before the internet, right? If your newspaper tells you something, that's what you know, for the most part. Okay, I think we can, I have a few other good things. I think we'll save them for next week. Okay, any last questions or anything? Thank you for joining me tonight. I will see you. Oh, this Friday, if you want, it's our Broadway Shabbat. But this is one of the most beloved musical services.